If you know what it's like to try to get things right or do it perfect, a recovering perfectionist like myself, or you've been on this loop of endlessly trying to fix something about yourself as a way to change or a way to heal, I know all of that really well. And today I get to talk with Lauren Polly, who's also the author of The Other Side of Bipolar. And we had a powerful conversation about how to shift from high functioning anxiety to fulfillment. So, first off, we talk about what the heck is high functioning anxiety and how it can masquerade as success and how you can identify it in your own life. Then we give tips for noticing signs of high stress states in the body and what to do about them and calm them. And one of my favorites, why slowing down can feel so uncomfortable, but how it can actually be the key to finding a lot of creativity and inspiration. So enjoy the show. Welcome to the Shift Your Vibe to Thrive podcast. My name is Emily Evans Russell, and I'm a single mom, multiple six-figure business owner, and master mindset and energy coach. I created this podcast with two main targets. One, to give you practical tools so that no matter where you are in your life right now, you not only know that things can shift, but you know how to make them greater. And two, to change your frequency so that you become an energetic match for everything you desire. I'm talking your relationships, your finances, your success, all of it. Think of this podcast as your weekly energetic upgrade with a mix of subconscious mind hacks, ways to quantum leap, and consciousness shifts. A place where you learn to sculpt your reality and actually finally truly have the magical life you deserve and one that works for uniquely you. Are you ready to uplevel your reality? I think I hear yes, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for being here. And now let's go to the show. So I'd like to just jump right in with you, Lauren.
We're already mid-sentence when we hit record. So.
Yeah, we were already talking beforehand about, can you just intro us into this idea of when we go into like really desiring to fix something or fix ourselves and getting it right and doing it perfect as a way to heal ourselves or feel safe, and how that does not, what is that and why doesn't it work?
It's a compensation for trauma. And I think when we hear the word trauma, we're thinking like a massive, huge event, but it can be that. It cannot be that too. It can be anything that you got in your life where you just had to go beyond it. I get to the other side of this thing. You know, a massive breakup, somebody coming at you with a lot of negativity, a big life upheaval, plot twist, like you'd like to say, Emily. For me, it was a mental health diagnosis. So I've had this since I was young. When I was diagnosed at 14, I knew I had to succeed and I knew I had to get to the other side of this thing. And what I did and what I see in so many other people is in order to do that, what we do is we try to control everything. We try to be perfect. And we really have this overachiever anonymous kind of thing that comes into the picture. But we're doing it from a way where our nervous system is totally out of whack. And a lot of the choices that we're making aren't leading to fulfillment. They're just leading to picture perfect success from someone else's book. So that's what I want to dig in today, is just kind of piecing this apart and how do we actually get from like this high functioning anxiety point almost to like high fulfillment in ourselves.
Yeah, can we go there more? Because you mentioned like that key word of your nervous system. Like I've noticed it's very easy for me to go in that hyper vigilant, mobilized mode to fix something. And then I get so off balance. Rather than getting more peaceful, we tend to just exacerbate the thing that's under there. So can you talk about one, like how to recognize it? And you could use your story or just examples of how do you recognize it and what's a different way to go about it?
I think looking at it from a different way with recognizing. So let's look at the mind first. When the mind is super busy, when you don't have a second to pause or breathe or expand your perspective even a little bit, you're probably in that space, right? And then looking through the body signs are very obvious. This is when we start sweating. This is when our blood pressure goes up. You know, we have little heart palpitations, or we're moving constantly. We can't just breathe. Being able to kind of pay attention to where the breath hits in your body. There's a lot of these like physiological markers that are actually I feel like we've gotten so used to them being out of whack that we don't even think it's off anymore. That's the problem.
I remember having a
Yeah.
conversation with a friend, and I was like, I've been in this mode for so long that it actually feels more comfortable. So it's like my body was giving me false signals to keep going in the direction of comfort, because our mind will go, well, that I know that one, at least it's comfortable. It actually felt scary and really uncomfortable to slow down and pause and listen to my body, because it was really used to me overriding it.
Yeah. And it's sometimes this boredom, right? And so a lot of us, if we're creating something or if we're just trying to get through our to-do list on a day-to-day basis, we're so used to that adrenaline pump going at full force, fight, flight, that we're constantly moving, but that's the galvanizing energy that we use to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And so when we pull away from that, it actually gets super uncomfortable because it feels boring. It feels like you don't have a creative spark. Sometimes you start feeling really lazy, like, gosh, I have so much to do. I just can't do it. So it's a fascinating thing to look at. Like, number one, being aware of where have you just not even paid attention to this, or it's become such a normal that it doesn't ding your radar. Like, I run a hospital department for my full-time gig, and I started noticing about a year ago, I was sweating most of the day. And I'm like, this is really bizarre. And I started playing with like not doing morning coffee and like all this, like these like overt things you think of. And I'm like, it's the energy that I'm walking into my sessions with, or hot conversations, customer service stuff, kind of being the point person for that. I really feel like this is an unsafe scenario. And when I'm going in, I'm using so much energy to try to control everything for a positive outcome, that my body is so nervous that it's sweating all day. And it got to the point that even when I was in like friendly conversations, right? I'm talking to people who don't have any problem with me. It's just the normal day to day. No reason to be nervous. My body was so used to being on that adrenal pump that it was still sweating.
Wow.
So I would say you start really paying attention to these physiological signs that you may just kind of be shoving off as, oh, well, I just think this is the way it's supposed to be, or this is the way it always is, because it may be something that's crying out for help,
Wow. What are some other things like that you might not notice that would be very subtle like that? Like sweating is a really great example.
Yeah. And it's like, it wasn't like I was like drenched in sweat.
Right.
It was just kind of that little armpit nervous thing that you get,
Yeah.
It sounds lovely to talk about. Very true. The breath, I think, is a big key when you start noticing that you're holding it or that it's very shallow. I think sometimes too, just this nervous energy that we get where we're constantly like having to fiddle or fuss, or, if I don't have enough to do, but I have that adrenal pump going, I start to actually click on a lot of windows and I start to multitask more. And I'm like, okay, that's just you being bored. And then also being uncomfortable with just being still for a second. Because we're so pushed into productivity, everybody's obsessed with this. High functioning leads to productivity, leads to success. That to have a second where you're actually moving slower or not doing anything feels like there's something wrong and unsafe.
Yeah. I mean, what I found interesting, you mentioned boredom, and that's definitely, I noticed as we start to slow down, at least for myself, it did feel like I was bored. And I just was like, okay, if I indulge this a little more, what was just beyond that was this very creative, flowy, spacious energy to do things from, but it wasn't that checklist productive energy. It's very different. And how do we get there when we are very used to, and we're very externally recognized for the checklist stuff? So I get why it feels good to be validated for that. And especially for high achievers, it feels good, right? To go like, I can't do all that.
Well, and I think it's so funny too, because part of it is just the awareness piece, right? But it's interesting to look at like, just right now, what are the top 3 things you're acknowledged for? Like me, I'm acknowledged because I'm on top of everything. I can do so many things so well. And a lot of people are like, wow, you're like a multitasker of magnitude. You just keep doing everything all the time. And the other thing that I get a lot of praise for is my perfection, to be able to just be everything so perfect and put everywhere it wants to be. It's like a little prissy Mary Poppins energy. But I find it so funny because I was looking at that of like, I get that kind of like praise all the time. And they're all anxiety light items. And what I mean by anxiety light is it's not like your typical generalized anxiety where there's something wrong and you're really nervous and you can't calm down, but it looks outwardly good, but it's because you're trying to compensate for the fact that there is anxiety there. You don't even realize it, but the motivating factor is we're afraid something bad will happen if we lose control. Therefore, I'm on top of everything. Because if I let it go, oh no, what will happen? Everything has to be picture perfect and very pristine and everything's together because that makes me feel like I'm together, right? And then the multitasking is the same thing. Well, heaven forbid you let a ball drop. So I think being able to recognize like what are the top 3 things you're really acknowledged for over and over again. And you may have capacities with that. All of those things are actually a strength that I have. But when they're coming from sympathetic nervous system response, where I am in that kind of heightened state, it leads to more anxiety and my body suffers versus coming at it from what you were saying, that flow state, that parasympathetic. It's like edgy, nuanced work of how can you engage with it without taking your body and your nervous system in a negative, I guess, direction, right?
It's a really interesting example, as you say that, of what could seem like the same actions or the same result externally, but when done from a different energy actually changes your nervous system, your body. And to other people, it might not be noticeable because you might still be multitasking. Like you said, it's kind of one of your natural gifts. So can you elaborate a bit more on then when we do those things from, like you said, a low level anxiety or a trauma response, almost like this makes me feel good, I get acknowledged for this is safer if I just keep going, and then shifting the energy to like, okay, I still do have things for my job that I do. I might, all of us have so many things going on. So multitasking is pretty much like, okay, we've got a lot on our plate. How do we begin to change that underlying energy?
Well, I think one of my favorite sayings, and I actually learned about this from the corporate world that I work, it's called stop, challenge, choose. And so in the moment when you're starting to, again, build your awareness of where you may be sweating a little bit more, or you're talking really quick, or you're fiddling with things that don't need to be fiddled with, like I do, and I get like that, to be able to like stop yourself in the moment, challenge what's going on, and then choose something different with that new perspective. And the challenge thing is really interesting because I love the fact that people are working a lot with like mindset, right? That's a huge conversation. You want to be in a business program, well, let's change your mindset, which is key because you have to look at your perspective. What's the story that you have in your past, that trauma story that you're trying to get beyond? What are you seeking that way? But it doesn't go far enough if you're not bringing your body in, because then your central nervous system is still seeing the situation as a threat. And so most people are like, but I am challenging it. I'm challenging my mind story. I know what it's coming from. But then they're still in this kind of like heightened state. You have to be able to interrupt your thought pattern and challenge that. But then you also need to take the extra beat of actually interrupting where your nervous system is. Taking a breath, moving from sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system, proven over and over again, and so easy to do. Plant your feet, take a breath, let it go completely. The world is not going to end if you take 2 seconds to do that, right?
Yeah. And because I know it's so easy, like you said, I like involving both approaches, like the mindset or like what people call that top down, like let's work at like our stories, our limiting beliefs. But I know for myself, and I've seen a lot of us can get stuck there. Mm-hmm. And we use that as like, there's another, oh my gosh, there's another story, there's another belief to fix. Oh my goodness. Whereas if you just go into the body and you go bottom up approach, when the body feels different, the thoughts actually change without this force effort. And it's like as simple as you said, taking a breath, lengthening your exhale just a teeny bit. And they almost seem so simple, as for someone like myself, it was like, that doesn't seem hard enough or challenging enough. You mean I just need to like walk in nature a little bit more without a phone and do some breath work even in like 10 breaths at a time or a bath. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I almost was wired to that seems too simple. It couldn't, because it's like this drip. You got to kind of drip it in, or at least I like that titration of drip for the body, drip for the body, drip for the body. And then all of a sudden, the nervous system, not all of a sudden, it's the slow drip of relaxation. And I want the fast, high achieving thing.
Yeah. Well, I think we're looking for the magic pill always. That's just the way our society is, right?
Yeah.
And we think the magic pill should be dramatic because everything else in life is dramatic. So there's a lot of that at play for sure. One way I love to look at this is nature, like you mentioned. Now, nature always takes the less, I don't even know how to say that, but it takes the most easy path a lot of times, right? It's extremely powerful. That little weed will work its way up through that concrete block like you wouldn't believe. It's a lot of work, but it's also like where the opening was for that to go, right? So if we start looking at us being natural beings, part of nature, not separate, which again is totally against how this world is run. So a lot of what we're talking about is very simple. Just know you're not alone because no one really functions that way. Everyone's functioning this hard, dramatic way. But if you start to change your perspective of actually being part of the natural world, these easier things, hopefully, after a while, start drawing you and seducing you into them because it is more part of your natural state. What I found is I've had to push my boredom factor and my way that's too easy factor in order to get there, though. That was one of the things I had to challenge. I had to challenge it with my head, going through such a dramatic past like I did and having to make big changes to be okay. Being able to challenge that mindset and then practice these body techniques that are actually really, really soothing and very simple. And like you said, Emily, the drip effect actually, it has a compounding effect after a while and it changes your baseline. Yeah. All of our baselines right now are one straw hits the camel's back and we blow. But if we can change our baseline and actually bring our nervous system down and relax a little bit more all the time, you can actually handle more and you can get more done because you're not at the knife's edge all the time,
And that part I love. One of the visuals I really appreciate with that is I think of it as like a river. And when we hit up against the bank is where we get triggered by something. Like you said, it's the straw that like throws me into, now I need to scream at someone, or I'm going to be in a hole in my bed for however many days, or, whatever that is. And the more you widen the banks of your river, you don't hit up against the edges. And we often look at, the edge of the really hard stuff, like I don't want to scream or cry or sleep all day or, that edge. But also as we widen the river, you have more of a capacity for also the joy and the happiness to be able to receive that too. And it's just like everything gets this flow that is very different.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
What pops when you say that is just like finding the love and the beauty and simplicity. And I think so many of us have lost that just because life really isn't simple. Everything has to be very dramatic and very complex. And if you fought really hard and worked really hard, you're more of a success, me, when my book came out, people were so funny because they're like, oh my God, everybody loves an underdog story. This is amazing. This is perfect. And I'm like, it's very interesting that you see it that way. And it is that way. Like I had to overcome a lot to be able to have normal success, let alone what I've created beyond all of that. But I've had to really watch it because I did have such a big thing that I wanted to try to go beyond that I really, really pushed myself. And sometimes, like you said before, in a certain energy, that push was what I was needing to self-evolve. That wasn't a bad thing, but there were times I took it too far or with a different energy, with the fixing or proving. And that was what was kind of getting ingrained in me, I was noticing with some of these physiological signs. So I think sometimes you have to really look at what is your underlying belief of the world and where you fit into it. And if you could challenge yourself to fall in love with the simplicity of it. And it feels so different to live there. I mean, you can do the exact same thing, but again, when it feels kind of oozy and mushy and, not as exciting maybe because it's not triggering your little adrenal pump, can you still fall in love with that and lean into it? And that's a challenge because it's a hard pivot to make to some people.
Yeah. Well, for people that don't know you too, can you elaborate on you've just said mental health challenge in your book, but
Mhm.
what was that? And yeah, I just like you to, because some people might not know your story, so we haven't talked about it.
Yeah. So my book is The Other Side of Bipolar. And I was diagnosed with bipolar when I was 14, that right tender age, after a suicide attempt. My parents had found a suicide letter, carted me off to the psychiatrist, and bipolar runs in my family. My aunt has it. So the book kind of walks you through being able to see me get a label placed on me and how I fell in love with the label at first because it gave me a sense of safety. Someone knew what was going on, someone knew hopefully how to fix it. And then going down the rabbit hole that a lot of us do, where we have something put on us and it becomes our self identity, and constantly bucking our head against it of, I really want to do this, but I can't because. Or, wow, it'd be really great to do that. I think I have a capacity with this, but I can't because. And my journey of just trying to get away from all of those becauses and really be able to move beyond into a place of success. Number one, absolutely, I've had a lot of outward success, but beyond that, really fulfillment, having that label not be something that holds me back, not be the elephant in the room or my self-identity anymore. So
Can you, I imagine, and I don't know, I'd love to hear from you, with having that diagnosis younger, and you've mentioned control, and I would imagine bipolar would feel quite out of control. And then how have you now, like really thriving in your life? Do you deal with like being able to let go of control and still know that things are good? I don't have to micromanage everything and control it. Have you found like techniques that you used or other people, or how have you made that journey? I think all of us have a desire to control things. I know I do. I won't speak for everyone, but but I would imagine that was a very big shift.
it was how I fixed myself, because initially it was, well, if I can control my mood, then I can control the diagnosis. And then in later years, when I was kind of like loosening the reins, I have a whole chapter titled that. When I was doing that and I was starting to feel bigger emotions and bigger energies, and I was pushing the kind of the boundary of my comfort zone in life to grow and evolve, as we all want to do, that came up for me in a big, big way, because then when anything felt too big or too intense, it had that same energy of being out of control. And I really had to come to the point of like, do you really want to live small and contracted and stagnant? Or are you willing to kind of play that comfort zone a little bit more and push the boundaries? And I was listening to one of my mentors, and he was interesting because he said, whenever you're looking at doing something new and expanding what you're out in the world, maybe you're, putting your voice out there more or starting a new job, life change, whatever it is, if you start looking at and feeling into your body sense of it, and if your body says, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm okay, to push that edge. Mm-hmm. But if your body freaks out and really feels like this is super unsafe, it's not something you're ready for, and it's a no for right now. Doesn't mean you're not going to grow into it by any means. And so I used that a whole bunch, where me and my body became really, really strong in communication and best friends, to be able to kind of go, this one pushes my button and it pushes my edge, and it's a little scary, but I know I'm okay. I can let that go. I can loosen the reins a little bit. And I feel like, again, this is bringing us back into this nervous system conversation, because you can actually feel it. Sometimes we think things are a threat when they're not. Your body still thinks that it is. So maybe there's going to be a little bit more time, practice, or attention to be had before you actually make that choice. So for me, that was a big thing with coming out of control, was just really kind of going, what's pushing my boundary healthy wise and what's too much of a stretch.
I love
and not
that.
Judging myself for it.
I love that. Because I know for me, one of the things with that I looked at too was my body's timeline, like you just mentioned, is very different than what my head thinks it should be.
Yes.
And so to allow that and not control it and go, okay, if I'm really getting my body's not ready for this, even if my head wants to push through, but my body's like, not safe, then really listening to that, and it might not go at the same timeline that your head thinks, but it's a way more sustainable way to create change. You don't get these big flip-flops of like big changes and fall back, and which is really hard on the body and the nervous system. And
or that functional burnout that so many people hit. I work with a lot of more C-suite corporate people, and they're very, very successful, but they push beyond, like we were talking about, from that space of anxiety improving and their brain going, do it, do it, do it, do it, without paying any attention to their body. And it's fascinating talking to people after they've hit a certain level of success, when either they've got the functional burnout, which is lack of energy and interest, and why did I do this in the first place, right? But also going into kind of this bigger body signs where they literally just can't get out of bed to do it anymore. And it's interesting to watch so many people be able to still have outward success because they followed their mind trajectory, like you were saying, without including their body. But I haven't seen a lot of people last happily there for a long time, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I found that interesting. I was talking with another friend who did corporate work, and she was on the podcast earlier. And I didn't realize that's very much, I was functioning in that very functional burnout. And it just felt like I'm just not as interested or have as much energy. But I don't know, it seems like I can still keep going. Whereas if we really tune in, and she's like, oh yeah, well, that's just a different level. I was thinking burnout was, I can't get out of bed, which it can reach that, right? But it was a very different perspective to look from. And I think a lot of us can relate to that when we actually, there's so many nuances, and our bodies are giving us that cue with our energy levels and our sleep and the low level anxiety that we might not realize, or the sweating, like you mentioned. It's like the clues are there.
Yeah. Well, and I think because we love the drama and we love things to move very quick, and we think if we're making a big change, we get the adrenal hit, so we're on the right path. A lot of us hit that point where like, we just have to change everything. We have to burn the business down. We have to like change jobs. We have to divorce. We have to whatever. And so I have to walk myself back all the time because that's always my first inclination. Like I went through a lot of stress about a month ago. The job got crazy with a bunch of different situations that were happening concurrently, which was always fun. And it was interesting because I'm like, I just have to quit. This is just it. Nope, done. And I'm like, you know, before you do something different, you should probably try to do what you're doing now differently.
I love that.
You know, let's just take a pause, take a breath, you know, get up to go to work tomorrow. It's perfectly fine. But what do you need? What does your body need to do differently in that circumstance? And a lot of it had to do with my mindset, my perspective on people wanting me to fix things and the expectation that I should be perfect in my response. And I'm like, number one, you're being a little hyper independent. You're not leaning on other people. You can.
And you're talking about yourself.
Yes.
You realize this. Okay.
To myself.
Yeah.
My little self-talk here, you know, being a little hyper independent. You're not leaning on people that you could. And also your perfectionism's getting in the way of you actually being able to do this in a way that's not going to stress your system out. And I physically got sick. You know what I mean? I'm out of the post-host of the 2-week cold at this point. But a lot of it was just the triggers that hit were triggering deeper stories. So that mindset work was needed, but then also a lot of self-care as well, you know? So I don't think people are, we want to make that big dramatic change, but also like, even if you do hit a really rough spot like I did just a couple weeks ago, what do you need to do to right the ship?
Well, I think a beautiful thing I'd love you to speak to before we kind of wrap up our conversation, to that hyper independence piece. Because when you say like, how can we support ourselves? Can you talk about trying to do it all on your own and how to get out of that hyper independence mode and resource the support that is available to you so that it can be easier on your body and your mind and all of that?
I think you have to come out of the love or the point of pride of being the person. You know, and I got that big time, you know what I mean? And a lot of that comes with like job titles or like being a mom or being whatever it is. Like it comes with the role that you're put in. A lot of us have this more in a work thing than a life thing, but it can certainly happen there. So when you have, and I catch myself doing that, well, I manage a department. I'm like, okay, there's my point of pride. Ta-da, it's me, I'm the person. Which there's nothing bad with, but you have to look at what comes with that. Well, if you're the point of pride and you're the person, everyone's going to be coming to you and you're going to be expected to fix it. And I had to really look at that because a lot of my employees, a lot of the people like my clients that were coming, they didn't actually expect me to fix for them. But my perspective was that I was supposed to do that, right? So for me, that really draws me into hyper independence because you're not looking at yourself as part of the whole anymore. So like going back to the nature conversation, nothing exists independently. We're all in this symbiotic relationship. So I had to challenge that perspective. And what helped my nervous system was actually being like, you know what? I've got a manager too. Time to hand some of this stuff off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And let some things go where I'm like, people are coming at you with a lot of energy, but that's their stuff to handle. Oh, another amazing quote from Lee Harris is intuitive I follow. I quote this to everybody. He says, your safety does not depend on you changing the energy in the room. Your safety depends on you choosing if that's the room to be in. And that's a huge one for me in this hyper independence conversation, because I'm like, you're really putting yourself as the person to fix not only the other person, the situation, but the entire energy of it. That's probably not a job you need or want to take on. It's a permission slip to start letting things go because we don't realize sometimes how big of a game that we're playing that draws us into this hyper vigilant, hyper independent, hyper anxious, but high functioning place that we love to live in so much.
Wow. That's such a beautiful quote, because how many of us try to do that? Like, I can just change this entire situation. I should be able to do this rather than maybe it's just not a room for me, a thing for me, a project for me.
You got to be careful with your self-study. I mean, I know I've been involved in self-help programs. I know you have too, where that was kind of a thing where you were supposed to be the master controller of everything. And it plays into your ego, which was really fun for a while until it's absolutely not. And then you have to really look at, okay, really and truly this bigger game that I'm playing, is it really something I want to be fussing with? And what a beautiful thing to let other people evolve as they're going to evolve and choose what they're going to choose. And I'm going to have my space to do it. And maybe everything won't be perfect or be on the timeline I want it to be. But man, I'm going to be a lot healthier at the end of the road if I just relax a little,
I think that's a beautiful, I always say your energy really is your most valuable resource. So it's okay sometimes to go, not that room, or I'll leave that room, because there's so much, it's such a valuable, precious source, and that relaxation in your body and having the whole picture and your energy really thriving as you go forward is so different.
Yeah. And being able to value that and value it more than the adrenal hit that you're used to getting. And it's hard because you've probably been living 30, 40, 50 odd years with that. And you have it also on a feedback loop. Social media feeds it back. The news feeds it back. The people in your life feed it back. So when you start becoming aware, you're like, wow, there's a lot of push and pressure. And you just have to go, you know what? This is just something I'm not willing to take on anymore. It's one of my big requests this past year. I'm just not going to choose things that create more pressure in my world. And stop. Done. I mean, I've done that in dating. I've had someone who was pressuring and I was like, oh, it just has this energy of pressure. Well, why would I go on third, fourth, fifth date? Nope, all done.
Yeah, just taking yourself out of like you said, a feedback loop.
Yeah, and removing yourselves from the room. It's the exact same thing. It doesn't have to be a physical room. It's just this feedback loop that we're in that we should do it, where, this is creating a pressurized situation. I don't like the way my body is feeling. I need to acknowledge that, leave the room. Yeah.
I love chatting with you. So
it's always so fun.
Where can people chat with you more, find you, hear you? Yeah.
Yeah. So the easiest way is my website, laurenpolly.com. I'm taking a little social media. We'll call it a break. It may be a break up. We'll see. Again, I'm really looking at what creates personal pressure for me. And that's just been one situation where I've noticed sometimes it really feels good and a lot of times it doesn't feel very good. So I'm kind of in an experimenting phase right now. But my website's got everything. Join my newsletter. You'll hear all the updates. And my book, a beautiful book, is up there as well.
Thank you so much for joining us and for all of your wisdom and perspectives. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the conversation. Yeah. And I hope everybody listening just lets themselves challenge just a little bit more after listening.
Yeah. Thank you. I hope you got something out of that episode. If you like this podcast, please share it with someone you know who'd find it useful or interesting, and subscribe so that you can listen to past and upcoming shows.